Can we, Mr. Walsh has one follow-up question on what we were just discussing. We'll make it brief.
Do you have it in your book what the gross projected tuition was in the budget last year for the 80 students? Before the excess costs grant?
Mr. Mancuso, I think the sheet that you were looking at would have that number. Mr. Mancuso had a sheet that he was referring to when he was saying, here's the amount that is being applied against outplacement this coming budget year, and how much was applied the prior year. So I think once he gets that, he'll be able to, I think that's the question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to compare what the $9 million number that's currently here, prior to excess costs, because I know you're reallocating in all different ways than
It
you did
gets us
before.
away from the, right.
Are you looking for 17-18 budget?
Yes.
17-18 gross?
Yes, just the gross projected tuition for the 80 students that were budgeted. Not how many are here, but that were budgeted.
It's about 6.7 million.
No,
No, that's,
No, I think it's not, that's not net. That's gross, I guess, right?
Is that gross or net?
Because net, it would be lower than the 5 million we have now, right?
I don't have that sheet.
net is the number that's in the book, the 4.655.
Yeah. So what's the gross number?
Gross is 6.7.
6.7 million. Thank you very much.
All right. Let's move on and talk about benefits, shall we? Okay, and benefits, as I recall, is still page number 31 for the detail, right? Can you, what's going on with pension and retirement, please?
Page 30, page 31,
On
there's a
page
little
31.
chart down below,
Yep.
broken out by the pension and the 401A.
Okay, when you say the town pension, this is the, explain that, Mr. Mayor, this is part of what we go through with our valuation report. I'll give you a couple minutes to chew. I understand.
Bit of honey's
I just put a bit of honey in my mouth.
Yeah, it's hard to get through those.
I was hoping.
So this is the valuation report that we typically get from our,
This comes from our actuaries. It's for the non-certified employees of the Board of Ed that aren't participating in town's pension.
so I was confused by two things here. A, it says the report's not going to be available to August. And B, I was surprised that the,
No,
that
we have final numbers.
yeah, so were they not shared?
Yeah. And he'll be here, PB and Tim will be here on the 15th. Tim Ryer, H&H.
Okay, so what am I misreading here? I guess, because this makes it sound,
The number we were given, which was a preliminary number, I understand, when we built the budget, was a 2.25.
okay, which seems outside, I'm not saying you used the wrong number. I'm just saying, as I recall, isn't that an outsized number as compared to what we're gauging for the rest of the town?
No, that's, I'm trying to remember, one of them went up more than I thought, and one of them went down more than I thought, but I don't, or didn't go up as much as I thought, and I don't remember which is which. But this was their original projection.
Is this coming down?
The book, yeah, this number is, if I remember correctly, is, the final number is $62,000 less than this.
Okay, because this is, I guess what concerns me, and tell me where I'm going wrong, and that's quite possible, is this is saying that this is an increase of nearly 17%. Now, the stock market's gone crazy this year, which helps everybody's calculations. Is this, so you're saying this is overstated by 70,000?
62,000.
62,000.
But the stock market this year won't count until next year.
Right, so you won't count it. So
Right.
this is a calculation based
Right.
off last year.
Right.
So in this, percentage increase, once it's adjusted for that 60,000, will be in line with what the percentage increase is for the town?
Well, there's different assumptions for the town, different experience for the town, different experience for that, because they're specific.
So we can
It's
get
not
in-
just an allocation of bodies, it's experience-specific.
So we can get into this calculation when we do it that night?
Correct,
This
the
will be
15th.
part of it? Okay.
Is this number up 17% because of the change in the discount rate that we used? I mean, why is it going up
Well,
17?
that's part of the, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Well,
part of
it's
the
got to be a
reason.
big number, part of it, right?
Yeah.
And is it
Yeah, we discussed
62,000?
this at the, well, Mr. Flynn, you weren't here at the quarterly review, but yeah, we went into some detail with this at the quarterly review.
Yeah, and I'll go
So
back.
most of this is driven by the discount rate?
A significant portion, yes.
Okay. And then it's, okay.
In health insurance you talked about earlier, you got from the state.
Can I ask him one other question? in
Yes,
regards to
you
the pension?
can.
And based on our last meeting at our quarterly when we discussed this, is that overstated by $62,000 because of changes in the assumptions that you guys made at the table that to smooth it over the first couple of years?
No,
Okay.
no, that's just an estimate that we have based upon last year's information, and then we get the final calculations from the actuary and whenever it was.
So we have an adjustment
Yeah,
here
so
of 62K.
it came after their book was published.
Okay, but some of it was smooth, right? Because you guys made a decision at your table to smooth it for a couple of years. So it wasn't as harsh, that number, with the 7% discount rate.
Right.
Oh, we did some, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
misunderstood your question.
Sure.
Yeah, the decrease of the discount rate caused the liability to go up,
Go
the
up.
ARC to go up.
Yes.
Then we also did some changes to the amortization.
Amortization's
on
good,
the,
yes. Yep.
on the unfunded liability.
So that changed it.
That
a
helped
little-
on the
helped-
other side.
Helped out
Yeah,
a
it's
little
got
bit.
like an offset, yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. What's going on with life and disability? I mean, we can read what it says here. Did we have issues there? What happened there? Did they give you a reason why it went up so much? Just, all they say are rates.
Yeah, driven, I think, by experience. Aon is going out to bid for us on that.
So are they going to have better numbers for us by the time this budget's approved?
No, I don't think so.
Not likely.
No.
Why wouldn't Ann bid it right away if the number went up so drastically? I mean, why are we waiting another year? So are you saying that they're preparing to bid it now and you're just kind of guessing at what, or did they supply you this 17% increase?
Whatever rates we used, they were the recommendation.
Are these the actual rates of the proposal you have? Is what that's, in other words, you have your renewal rates.
Not yet, no. These are recommendations based from Aon.
Well, normally you get your
Estimates.
rates in, and then if the rates
Nope.
are too high, then you make a decision to bid it.
They gave us recommendation, and they're in the process of going out to bid.
So it sounds like that's exactly what happened. You got new rates. They told you what the rates are. You're bidding, you're including those high rates in your budget right now, but you're bidding them with the expectation that you're going to beat that rate.
Hopefully, yeah.
Fair statement, yeah.
Any other questions, comments on benefits?
Yes, when do we hear back on the bid?
Yeah, I asked that.
yeah,
After
that-
the budget, right, you said?
I'm not sure exactly. I haven't been in touch with them recently on that, but
Would you be able to get to
find
them
out.
and get us an update on that? Because it would be nice to know that before we have to vote on the budget.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, did you line them up to come here?
Yeah, they'll be here on the 15th.
Could you tell them to be fully prepared to discuss that area in detail?
Yes, sir.
About how they got to that number that they're recommending, and then the whole bidding process and timing and things like that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on benefits?
Yeah, in
ahead.
regards to health insurance, explain to me the budgeted amount versus the $1 million savings that you guys had versus where we are now.
Can we take that offline? Because
Sure.
I think
We
you
kinda went through that
you
earlier.
went through that,
All right.
and you missed that?
I'll meet with the superintendent directly on it.
Okay, great. Any other questions on benefits? All right, let's go down to instructional services. Page 33 is the detail, and this gets into part of your allocation issue, correct? Because this is all included in that one line item. So do you want to step us through this a little bit? What's changing in the overall classification of instructional services?
No. It's, yeah, hello. Yeah. Yep.
Mr. Cummings, do you want to come forward to talk about your instructional services?
So I'm looking at page 33, and instructional services includes instructional services, pupil personnel services, and student activity expenses. Good evening.
Good evening. Mike Cummings, Chief Academic Officer.
Thank you, Mike, for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
Do you want to step us through what's changes year over year in this?
I can speak most specifically to the first line, the instructional services change,
Okay.
which is increased by $106,094. I will speak specifically, this money is being invested in professional development primarily for our staff. We are looking at a couple of initiatives. One, partly in response to the changes in our English Learners Program. We're working to substantially increase support for classroom teachers who are working with English language students in the classroom, particularly at the secondary level, students who might be taking a social studies or science or a math class. We also are looking at the elementary level, as we've implemented a new social studies curriculum this year with a new science curriculum coming online in elementary in a couple of years. We're working to increase our elementary teachers, particularly in grades 3 through 5, their capacity to teach problem solving and inquiry-based instruction, constructivist type instruction at that level. With an adoption of the science curriculum, the next generation science standards in the secondary level at 9-12, we will be providing teachers at that level, at the high schools, with support, instruction. There is a lot of curriculum being written. The board will be reviewing that curriculum at their April meeting. So we're supporting teachers in the adoption of instructional methods there. That curriculum really necessitates a change in the way teachers approach instruction. It's a lot more discovery method than it's been in the past. And let me make sure, I want to make sure. And the other thing we're working on is, as the board is aware, it may come up in, we talk a little bit later about technology, but we are looking to infuse technology into our grade 7, grade 7s across the district, as well as in the science and social studies departments at the high school. We are looking to support teachers in how to most effectively use that technology in their instruction. One of the things that we are committed to is that the technology will be in service of the instruction. The technology is not the outcome of the instruction. So how do we better utilize technology to foster collaboration among students? How do we better use technology to access resources? Those are the types of things we're, and I apologize, and also how do we better use technology for students to bring resources together in answers, in solving original problems. Those are the tasks that we're looking to promote through that professional development. So again, that first line item is primarily professional development to support the instructional development of our staff.
Any questions, Mr. Mottola?
So does that relate to page 3 of the budget book? Where you talk about your 2018-19 targeted enhancements and what you want to do in the district improvement plan?
It does relate to facets of the district improvement plan, absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm just getting the page.
Can I ask one other question on that, Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, please.
So you talk about the targeted enhancements and the 2015-2020 district improvement plan focus. Dr. Jones, generally has the district been able to, I'm on page 3, Has the district been able to implement the district improvement plan? Have you been able to, over the last couple of years, do what you want to do in that area?
I think that we have made a lot of progress. If you look at the district improvement plan as it was written, have we been able to do everything that is in it? No, we have not. We were going to implement world language, more expansively at elementary. We did put off our science implementation
Till this year.
to next, yeah,
Right.
this budget where originally it was supposed to be last year. So we have been adjusting.
Okay.
We've also, last summer, we virtually did almost no summer work for professional development, which is unusual in Fairfield. So we have not been able to implement it 100%, but we've made growth and we've done some great work.
And you haven't been able to do that because it's just the financial fiscal situation the last couple of years?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Mr. Flynn, if I could,
Yes.
page 19, while Mr. Cummings is getting his question to you. I know whenever an institution reclassifies an item, it makes it difficult to compare last year with the next year. But if you look on that page, you'll see how the excess cost of 3.986 was spread last year and how it's going to be spread next year. That might give you at least a higher level understanding of comparing apples and apples.
Thank you very much, appreciate that.
Go ahead. You're up.
That's a good schedule. Let's go back to 33. Any other questions on instructional services? On that one line? Yeah, go ahead, Mrs. Marvin.
I just have a follow-up to Mr. Matola's question, which is, you mentioned the district improvement plan, and are you concerned in terms of projecting forward, in terms of what's coming down the pike from the state, and, you're trying to budget in a fiscally responsible way. Are you concerned that we're not going to hit targets with our district improvement plan with the current budget, and then looking forward? Are we, with this budget, at risk of not being able to do all that we've set out to do in terms of our district improvement plan?
Yeah.
Ms. Pegg.
That's a hard question. What I can say is that I think we're doing great work in Fairfield. We're moving our district forward. The work that we're doing with next generation science standards, focus on STEAM and elementary in this budget. Are we able to do everything that was originally in that district improvement plan? No. But I'm very optimistic about what's in this budget to not only target what we heard at our safety seminar last week about mental health issues. We are absolutely addressing that aspect of our curriculum. Science is critical, that we continue to move forward in science, technology, making sure our teachers and our students have the resources. So I feel very good about this budget. Are we doing it on a tight budget? Absolutely. I think we have staff doing some pretty amazing work, and they were very thoughtful in what they requested this year, and it's based on needs for the district.
If I could, the board, when it passed the district improvement plan, had already projected that in year 3, in the spring of year 3, that we would take a fresh look at it, because things change over years. But when we hired the new superintendent, we also asked the superintendent to take a look at the district improvement plan and see where she may want to make adjustments in it going forward. So we are going to be doing a review of it this spring, and there may be changes in the district improvement plan based on input from our new superintendent and changes in the world.
Any other questions on this line item? Seeing none, let's go to the other big one here is pupil personnel services. Now, we touched on this earlier. We talked about the 450, which is coming out as regards the 5 new positions you're requesting or you're putting in. So that comes out. And then the movement, the reclassification of the excess cost-sharing reimbursement. So really,
That's under student activity expenses.
no. Movement of excess cost-sharing, they have listed under 309 pupil personnel expenses. 510, it is 509, 255 here, 510 here. right?
Yes.
I'm reading that right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So the two real changes here in the program are additional expenses for consultation services?
Yes, for our program development initiatives.
So it's all wrapped up to this same initiative?
Yes.
Do you have, when the board, just so that we can get our arms around it, because I feel like we spend a lot of time on it, did you do a presentation to the Board of Education explaining what you're trying to do with all these new programs in special ed that you can just forward to us and we can get to our board?
Yeah, we did the, I can send you something. I can send you a summary of all of our program initiatives and the attached costs to them.
For the sport, in just the special ed area, which is
Yes.
your area of expertise?
Yes.
Yeah, it'd just be good because there seems to be pieces here, there's pieces there, there's personnel implications, and just trying to get a holistic view of it is a little bit hard for me.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I apologize. I can get you a program description and all the different pieces to each of the programs that's attached to these figures.
Yeah, I'd like to understand really what you're trying to do, just so I can wrap my arms around it, that's all. So thank you. Ms.
Now, I was just saying, we can send some of the links from the meetings where we talked about those various programs. And I actually don't like to use the word initiative, I'll just say, because I don't see these as initiatives. They're actually programs we need for our children. So sometimes when we say the word initiative, people think that it's something just new or, but these are, that are optional. These are actually just programs for our children that are necessary.
You'll never hear the word initiative out of my mouth again.
Okay. Good luck with your non-initiatives.
Thank you.
All right, let's go, any other questions on these three line items on instructional services? Okay. Did you guys, do you have anything?
I was just comparing notes with Selectman Kiley, and he's got a different book than us, with an extra, with a column. I have an extra column, he doesn't, and our numbers
You got
don't
the old book,
match.
Chris.
Or does he have the old book?
The new book has a column at the, 4 columns: budget, proposed, increase, decrease, and summary.
Yeah,
You got the new one.
I got the new one, he's got the old one.
Because there's a slight variance, it's a couple
That's the, that was the increase, that was the change after the Board of Ed actually approved the budget.
All right,
Thank you.
so let's move on and go to contracted services. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Marmee.
I just want to ask a quick question. Why the decrease in the student activity expenses? What does that encompass and why the decrease?
That's just their independent budgeting, correct? Yeah.
Per student.
Yeah. That's actually just based on the allocation and how the headmasters or how the principals allocate their funds. To student activities or not. They may have chosen to put it in a different category like professional development and increase that and decrease another area. They may have had a club that existed last year, next year it's not going to. That's why it's not, you're not seeing a big change there, but it's site-based budgeting for our principals and headmasters.
Okay, so the Board of Ed didn't decrease the amount allocated. It's the specific principals based on what they specifically need?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right, if that's okay, let's go on to contracted services, which the detail behind contracted services is on page 35 of the budget book. We can take any and all of this, but the big item here is other services, which again references special education. And is this just a reclassification?
Yes, 350,000 was that excess cost that would have shown on that line item, and being that it's only a 315 increase, it's truly a decrease in expenses.
Right. Okay, so that's the entire reclassification of that line item, makes it look like that's going up.
That's correct.
Do we have any other questions in contracted services then? Mrs. Marmion?
So just looking at security services and expenses, which is 0% change. Just to clarify, security comes out of the town's budget, right? and we have, do you want to summarize what we've done from a security standpoint? Because we have done quite a lot in the last, not specifics, I mean just overall, because there was so much discussion recently with parents addressing security, and I think there's some confusion that that comes out of the Board of Ed budget, which it really doesn't.
Well,
And then
parts do, but.
parts, but do you want to just give us a little background so people understand that we
quick.
have actually spent significant amount of money on security? Just summarize for us.
So at a couple of community meetings, I have commented that actually the citizens of Fairfield should thank the First Selectman, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the RTM, because in the last, since Sandy Hook, this town has spent about $7 million on capital improvements to enhance the security of buildings. And you have done so without asking a lot of detailed questions, which our chief of police appreciate. But that is a commitment this town has made to the security of its students. So that is one portion of what we've done. Some of it is bonded. In the year of Sandy Hook, actually, the board accepted Dr. Title's recommendation to defer certain capital improvements at Woods or other places, and on a $100,000 line item, spent about $750,000 to make immediate changes in security at various buildings. And so in total, that's about $7 million, some of it out of the operating budget, most of it capital bonding. Now, in addition to that, the town went from 2 school resource officers, one at each high school, and created a 6-person school security unit. That is in the town budget and is a significant, I'll say, contribution to school security that's carried on the town side. And so that should be noted. The other major change is, I'm going to say 6-7 years ago, this line item was about $100,000, sometimes a little less, not too much more. And so this line item has been, quote, significantly increased. It may not seem like 175 is a significant number, but compared to what we historically carried, it was. So this line item, the capital improvements, and the police officers, I think would be the sum total of all we spent at the community meetings. When I mentioned $7 million, I only was referencing the capital expenditures, not the operating expenditures of the police department. Does that help?
It does, thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, let's go to transportation. I see Mr. Fickey's here. Welcome. Well, within this increase, maybe not welcome, but nice to see you anyway. So student transportation is going up by $700,000 or 8.5% or so. Can you talk to us about what's going on? We did hear from the superintendent earlier that, 2 bus routes were canceled?
Do I?
Consolidated, right?
Well, we had anticipated we were going to need 1 new route this year. We did not add that route, and we consolidated 2 routes. So it's 3 in total.
So what's going on? What's the increase?
The budget was built on the preliminary bids that came in. That's part of it, and special ed out-of-district transportation has given us quite a challenge this year.
Because more students are being shipped out of district, or because?
Everything went out to bid. So we were using a 5-year-old contract for both the big buses and for the out-of-district placements. In July, they went out to bid on the special ed buses, which changed the rates. We had one contractor picked up 13 runs. Some were cheaper, some were more expensive.
I think the key question here is, given we have a new agreement in place, have we been able to save any money on these numbers?
Yes.
Well, and I'm sorry, we have a new agreement in place?
As of last week, First Student was given a 2-year contract to provide student transportation. And then in July, the special ed out-of-district transportation was awarded to 5 different contractors, with one of the contractors picking up 13 of the out-of-district runs.
What is the cost savings that you estimate we're going to achieve?
You take it.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like it.
The best place to look at this is page 81. Starts on 81. Towards the bottom of the page. The last category, business services, number 64. If you go all the way to the last column, the increase is special ed.
Yeah, no, I know. We talked about that, but we have a new, I guess the question is, right now we're saying in the budget book, the increase in total is $709,000. This is based on a preliminary contract, preliminary agreement. You're now saying that as of last week, you have a new agreement. Please tell me this number's come down.
I got this tonight, so
What,
It's
you
very
got what
close.
tonight?
I got the data, the prices. This was bid out by Gerald Foley at the town.
No, I guess, I'm sorry, I thought we just,
Yeah.
somebody just said we have an approved
Okay.
agreement as of last week, correct?
Montzel, I think, is
I'm sorry, yes.
So we now have a contract in place?
We're working on the contract. We have pricing.
Okay, so
Firm
what's this
price.
number going to be?
It's about 190,000 lower.
Thank you, that's what I was trying to get at.
Way to get there.
but if I can talk for Mrs. Munsell for a moment.
That's very simple
No.
question. Why do you
Yeah, I think she is still finalizing that number, so if we could get you a memo that says, here's what we think it is, that might give you a better number to work with for the budget hearing.
As
Yes,
long
please.
as it's
Thank
more
you.
than 190, absolutely. We have just established the floor for this adjustment, 190. Okay, and the special ed, the changes here, I mean, I didn't understand your explanation because you said, hey, we're working off a 5-year-old contract. We did a 5-year-old contract that include increases each year, right? So it's really, it's not like we're working off a 5-year-old rates. We were working off of rates that were agreed to 5 years ago, right? What changed between last year and this year is, bus companies out of business. What's driving this up?
Not all of the contractors give us an increase every year.
Okay,
A couple of the companies hold their prices. We have one company that goes by the bid document that's out there, and they change their prices every 6 months because they're allowed to. We can't not give them the work because they were the low bidder on the contract. And the low bidder goes by what was printed.
Mr. Fickey, if you could, just to help folks out, we think of First Student as our bus supplier, our bus contract. How many different companies do we do business with?
7 or 8, right?
5 right now.
5.
Okay. And what percentage of the business does First Student have versus the others?
First Student does all the in-district
Right.
transportation, big buses and small buses.
Right.
Okay, what percentage of our dollars would First Student get versus the others? Ballpark, I'm not, this is not a quiz, it's just, is it 80%, 60%, 90%?
It's the majority. I don't know.
I would say it's 90%.
Okay.
But it depends on where the
That's
special ed
okay.
kids are going, because
That
I'm
gets
not,
very expensive,
this is,
right?
this
That's
is
very
not,
expensive.
this is not a quiz. I was just trying to get a ratio and feel so that everybody understands that as much as First Student does the vast majority,
Yes.
there are still a number of the contracts, but they're not the ones doing the vast majority. So First Student is still the driver for what our increases in costs are.
yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You went through the regular bid process for this, correct?
The town did, yes.
Okay. And you were involved in that process, I hope?
Somewhat, yes.
What does that mean somewhat, just because I know you run the whole thing and, I'd never want your job, but, and I think I say that every year. But how involved are you in that process?
We attended a bunch of meetings. I got regular calls from either Mr. Mayor or, the purchasing agent, and I was involved. I was there when the bids were open, so,
And you helped write the RFP for the bids and all that?
yeah. There were a
And you're
number-
comfortable with who you selected, and there's no gotchas in there from your perspective, from an operational perspective?
At this point, yeah. So there were some changes that came up, some numbers were rebid, type thing, but it was, I think that the biggest thing was the insurance documents that came in, so.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the initial bids were, compared to the final bids, I think were like about $700,000 or $800,000 or a little bit more higher. But it was a long and laborious process that we went through with a couple of revisions, and, when we sent out, not rebid, but sent out some amendments, and it was basically, we didn't make, and the changes were, there was no changes made to the RFP.
Yeah, I just want to make sure
It's just a
that-
matter of,
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the
Pricing,
gentleman who's going to manage the
negotiation.
agreement after it's signed was involved in the process of getting the agreement, so that he, you didn't maybe negotiate something away that he really
Right.
needs. Not that we don't trust you,
Yeah.
but just that, we want to make sure.
not a thing was negotiated away.
Right. Mrs. Leclerc, did you have?
Oh, are the buses kept in Fairfield? I know at one time that was an issue. Like, are they stored in Fairfield?
Yes, we're down on One Rod Highway. The maintenance is done out of town, but the buses are here, and they're dispatched out of town, too.
Yeah, the maintenance is in Norwalk.
Okay, and then do we pay the fuel, the new contract?
We purchase the fuel and provide it for the buses.
Can I, while you're here, is there any other question on transportation? If not, what I'd like to do is, very quickly, so we can let him go, flip to the private bus contract, which is in our regular budget book on page 141.
Can I just
You
ask
can ask
one-
your question, absolutely.
In regards to the special ed, as we start bringing more services in-house, are we having less bus runs for out-of-town placements?
I hope so.
Have we seen any?
No, we've seen more, actually.
Okay, so,
More services being provided to students. I have 3 pending requests out there, but they're not full student services. No.
what does that mean?
Well, they're not placing a student out of town at a different school. It could be DCF or the courts have moved a student, and so we're bringing students back here to be educated rather than doing it in New Haven or wherever. And there's some intensive programs that we're transporting students to out of town, but we take them up and drop them off, and then the parents pick them up, so the parents can meet with the counselors or whoever at the programs. So,
Okay. But are we going to, you think, Dr. Jones, are we going to be seeing that? I mean, I thought there was and even under your predecessor, there's a lot of talk, and a lot of money actually talked about building these programs for special education in-house. But we don't seem to be driving that number down at all. So it still seems like the transportation numbers even though we're developing these and paying for these programs in-house, the numbers of transportation dollars seems to be still going up.
Transportation is definitely a challenge, and as you know, we audited our general education transportation. That's one of the reasons we were able to consolidate routes.
Yeah.
Right now, our special education director as well is going through all of our special education routes, kind of very carefully, student by student, to see if we can basically audit our special education routes to find more efficiencies, but we've just started that work. So we are hoping to be able to find more efficiencies because we do have children going all over, to different localities.
All right, when's that audit going to be completed?
We're working on it right now. It takes an inordinate amount of time.
Is it going to be done during this budget process?
No.
No.
Especially with the new, bus contract, and we have a lot of work to do. We're changing our software, which is also going to help.
Okay, so do you think you'll need till like September or something like that?
I don't know if you want to.
I think that would be a goal to at least start implementing some efficiencies.
All right, to you, Mr. Chairman, for our first quarter meeting for this budget, could we get an update from the Board of Education in regards to, that should be done by then?
Yep.
And this way, it would help us to be able to determine whether there's going to be any savings or efficiencies for the year that we can know about and track throughout
that
the
on our
4
agenda?
quarters.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can we go to, oh, Mrs. Leclerc, go ahead.
Could I have a follow-up request to that? Once you have time to really understand the new bus contracts and they've been approved, can you give us a 2-year comparison, comparing the old contract with the new one, so we understand what the increases will be? Like some sort of...
The dollars?
Yeah,
Maybe a number of buses, too? But-
thank you. Can we turn to page 141 in the regular budget book real quick? The 1.75% increase for the private bus transportation, it's about $26,000, is that correct?
I think he might be in their budget.
No, it's just no.
Page 141 in our regular budget book.
It's not ours.
Our
Oh.
budget, town budget book.
Sorry, townwide budget book, and I guess I'd have the same question. With a new contract, do we know what the impact will be on this line item?
This is the revised one? So this is the revised number based on the new contract. So any savings relative to the initial contract is baked into here. And the increase is 1.75%. So
How did you get the numbers if they just kind of cut the contract?
I cut the contract.
he had the numbers. He hogged the numbers.
Forget who runs purchasing.
So you ran them before it was approved, or they said it was approved 2 weeks ago or something like that?
Yes, it's true. About 2 weeks ago.
But you had an agreement about, okay,
No, we agreed to it 2 weeks ago. We knew the numbers that we agreed to.
okay, so you changed it right before the budget was printed?
Correct.
Okay.
Here's an interesting question I have then. So we're going to save a fair amount. So this, I'm just comparing, saying, the private bus contract is only going up year over year 1.75%. Right? Fair statement?
Yeah, 1.5
It's 1.75.
to 2, something in that range, yes, depending, there's different routes, there's different types of buses, there's different variables within each.
Okay, here's what I don't understand. In here, it's going up year over year in private bus transportation, 1.75%, based on the new contract. In the Board of Ed's budget book, it's going up by 8.57%. Now, I know that it's coming down by 190, so if I back that out, I'm still at a much higher increase rate of between 5 and 6% than I am the 1.75%. So since you negotiated this, did you negotiate yourself a more favorable rate on the
No,
town
that
side,
didn't-
the expense of the Board of Ed
I
side?
I can't speak to the increases over in the Board of Ed because I have no idea what the prior year was based upon. But the contract, the overall contract is close to a 2% increase for first student.
Which would mean the vast majority of this increase on the Board of Ed side is related to those special education buses? Can we get that breakdown on that with the new number that's reduced by 190,000 so we can see what's going on there? But it's a significant, it's a much higher percentage.
What portion
as
is,
a-
what portion is the special ed?
Yeah. So can we get that breakdown? I don't know who to ask because I don't know who's the keeper of the kingdom, that, you know. So if we could get that and understand that a little bit more. Does anybody have any other questions?
Just, the theme I'm getting from tonight's meeting is that special education is unpredictable and is blowing the budget up. Is that a fair statement? I mean, it's, and I know you're doing new things. I know you don't like the word initiatives, but, and we should be
Probably
doing
didn't like
those
the
things.
word blow up either, but,
Well,
you know.
I didn't mean it that way, but it's the big thing here, right?
It is.
It's a volatile area of our budget, yes.
I think when we do the quarterly, you have all got to do a better presentation on special education every quarter. How many students, what's changed from one quarter to the next? Because if it's that volatile, this board needs to know it and know why. So it just can't just be one line and we just move past it. It's got to be an explanation, because you could have 2 placements and they blow your budget. So I think we're going to have to spend more time, and your presentation that you have is going to have to be more detailed in regards to number of students, dollars, where they went to, transportation costs associated with it. It's going to have to be more detailed when we get to quarterly.
Okay. Any other questions on transportation? The next line item is tuition, and we've already really gone through that. Unless anybody wants to go through that in any detail, we need some more information on it. We're going to get it. But Mr. DeWitt, go ahead.
Just one
Ricky,
quick-
thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
One quick question, I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, but whatever. What's the number of open choice students we're carrying in this budget?
65.
65. Phil says no. Last year it was 18.
No, open choice last year was 72 for the district. We did not actually take open choice students this year, given the budget challenges at the state level. And we had 4 students who graduated, 3 who moved. So we actually have a lower number in the budget this year for open choice.
I think the original,
Sorry,
I think there was an increase at one
Sorry.
point, a discussion of 18.
That's what it was. We were up 18 last year.
And, well, and you may have been thinking what was planned for this year. In our actual racial imbalance plan, it was anticipated that we were going to be taking students this year, but given we must notify, and when CES reaches out in the spring, April or May, if we're going to take students, and we were not of the position, not knowing, especially at April or May when they were talking about the $9 million in retirement. So we did not accept students this year.
So last year the budget was 72, and this year 68. So it actually did go down.
This year, we have 65 actual students because
65.
4 graduated and 3 moved, so it actually went down.
And what's in this budget? Is that the 65, or is that?
65.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
There's
for
only
the
a
question.
reduction purely from attrition. Right. And you're not adding anymore. Obviously.
The budget number that's in here, what I can say is in the racial imbalance plan, we are planned to add more students for next year, and the board has had about an ounce of discussion, but I do believe that going to next year, it is the board's desire that we implement the racial imbalance plan that was submitted to the state of Connecticut.
And that's in the budget, in this budget. The cost associated
flat.
with those.
Well, we don't ever build in actual, like a cost that comes with it. It's actually the revenue. So if you look at the revenue line, that's where you'll see it went down this year, because when we take an open choice student, we get $3,000 per student, so we didn't get that money this year. How that's calculated within the budget is totally, what you're asking is a totally different question. And there are many different lenses to look at.
But if we get to $3,000 a student and it pushes us over into requiring another teacher and opening up another section, then it's really a net loser, right, for us?
Well, when we bring students in, for instance, had we taken students this year, we go through all of our elementary sections based on their actual in the summer where they're sitting, and try to put those students in those sections where there is space and there is room. And over time, you hope that you've placed them correctly so that you don't end up having that cost driver. So if you have sections of 18, and by the time they're in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, you could have 25 students, even if they add a student the next year and the following year, if they're placed really well.
Mr. Timiak?
A couple things. One, I feel like we just did debate 2 weeks ago at the Board of Selectmen when we were talking about the racial imbalance plan. I really don't want to go into that. I have 2 basic questions. One, is the enrollment projections, do they take into account adding students?
No.
Why wouldn't they?
As far as the open choice?
Yeah.
Because you don't know from year to year what we are going to add, and, especially this year, we have, many new board members. So as a school superintendent, I don't even know what the philosophy of the board is. Are they going to amend the racial imbalance plan? They're looking at actuals, and they're using all of the data, like birth rate data, cohort data. So once if that student comes in and we choose to take a student, then they become part of the cohort data. So after that first initial enrollment, then yes, they're actually built into the projection. So if you look at the projection this year, these 65 students are all in the projections because there are students now.
Okay. So, and I understand that those are now part of the projections, but if it's part of the plan to add students, why wouldn't they factor that in there? Because the plan's already written, right?
The plan is written, but I think you see that we were not able to implement that. So, based on the budget. Granted, we could ask Malone and McBroom to, put in an additional, whether that's 5 students or 10 students, we could do that for the projection, but we have not to this point.
Okay, and then my second thing was, there was the conversation about, increasing the size of Mill Hill to a 504 school was also, there was a caveat presented by Mr. Dwyer that the school board was going to look to redistrict, and we were being basically told by the state that sometime next February, we needed to submit to them a plan to do that. And that was very clear when you were supporting the 504 school, that was something which was going to be looked at. I find it hard to do both, have that plan you were talking about for next winter and open choice right now to do that.
I think what I said at the Board of Selectmen meeting is, setting aside the racial imbalance question, this town has a facility utilization issue where we have more students than the capacity of the school, specifically at Sherman, but one other. And so, setting aside the racial imbalance, we may, it's not a yes, but we may have to look at redistricting just to solve that issue. And that Malone and McBroom, this is going a little bit off the budget, but Malone and McBroom said that in order to facilitate that decision, both Holland Hill and Mill Hill should be at 504. That's a question that I think we can delve into more on April 3rd.
Correct.
And so yes, racial imbalance has an impact on it, but set that aside and pretend it doesn't exist at all. That question would still be a valid question for the board.
I feel like I asked that question 3 different ways at the Board of Selectmen meeting, and I kept coming back to the same spot. We've had a spacing issue with our schools being overcrowded. I specifically asked you that question, which essentially hasn't changed. What you were leaning on was the state basically strong-arming us into doing something about the racial imbalance plan, and that's why you threw out the redistricting at the time. And you're right, tonight's not the night to do that, but I feel like you've just changed the narrative on what happened 2 weeks ago at the Board of Selectmen meeting.
I'm sorry if you heard it that way. I did try to emphasize that there are 2 different issues. Racial imbalance is one issue, but the proper facility utilization of the school spaces may dictate that we have to look at that question of redistricting all by itself.
You did do that,
Yeah.
and it was pointed out by me several times that the school, we haven't done anything to address either one of those to this point. And that's where we got in the loggerheads there. And now tonight I'm hearing that we're potentially this spring going to be accepting open choice, basically undermining the argument that we're going to move towards the redistricting plan to justify what the 504 was, and we're going to continue to add students without rebalancing what you also deem as a problem. So it's like the open choice wasn't part of the debate 2 weeks ago, which is why I'm frustrated.
Let's save this for our April 3rd meeting. You can come and be ex officio there, and we'll be talking about it again. And thank you for the conversation. Is there any questions, any more questions on this item? Or can we move to tuition? Anything else on tuition right now? We discussed this a bit earlier when we talked about salary expense and compensation. All right, I'm going to move on to other purchase services, which is page 39 is more of the detail. And this is going down as compared to budget, but up as compared to actual, is that correct? Is that a fair statement? If I look at the estimated actual, it was 1,137,000, and we're going up to 1,392. Can you talk a little bit about what the difference is between the actual and the requested budget?
What page he's on? I'm sorry, what page are you on?
I'm sorry, so I'm on page 39.
Okay.
And then if I reference back to page 27, which is really what I'm using as kind of the guiding light here. So when I look at page 27, okay, budget to budget, you're down. You're within $18,000. Hey, great. When I look at what you spent this year actual, what you're proposing to spend, you're up by over $255,000 over prior year. So what happened this year that's not happening next year? Like, why the difference between what you're actually spending and what you want to spend next year? It's not a gotcha question.
Is that a question Mike would know? 'Cause I'm not following that.
Just sounds like one. Just sounds like one.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's the 1137 versus the 1392.
And if we don't have that, because, you know, you got to build it back up, that's fine. You can send it to us with a brief little explanation.
Is part of that the money that we,
On 83?
That's okay.
I'll go ahead and say that, if you're, you know.
One of the decreases I see is PD for special ed.
One of the decreases, so that's between what was budget and estimate. I mean,
Between, right, between estimated this year.
it might be more efficient if you guys just take a look at it and come back to us and give us an answer in writing. Like I said, I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. Does anybody have any other questions? Are you guys okay if we get an answer to that? Okay. Can we go to supplies and textbooks? Once again, there's a smaller increase, still an increase of $331,000 versus this year, and $835 versus the actual of this year. So what's going on there? This is page 41. So what's?
I'm sorry, can you state that question again, or did you, is it the science, next generation science standards, I believe is what you're asking about, which is the line 401?
Okay. Right.
The total is 625,000
Okay.
to implement for next year. So that's where you're seeing that the large increase.
Okay, and was something not done this year that was supposed to be done? Because there's a significant, the budget was 2.8 million, and you're estimating 2.3 million, so what's happened there?
That's what's been in reserve and going to close the gap for special ed, correct? Yeah, that's one of the challenges actually this year for us is that, as you know, we had 2.3 million that we froze because of the unanticipated expenses. So when you're looking in these curriculum items, that's summer work that we didn't do, that we froze. It's items that we didn't purchase for materials and supplies that we froze. And because our special education tuition's running over, you know, every year we're probably, as of this week, going to have a hole in our snow removal portion of the account. We have to make sure we don't, that we have money to cover that at the end of the year for the Board of Ed.
So what was the science thing that you just referenced, was that pushed off a year because of that?
We did actually, it was, we pulled it out, it wasn't actually in the budget plan, 625 sitting there. That was pulled out before the Board of Ed approved the budget last year, but we did push it off a year. That's why it has to be in here this year, because we have already put our implementation off a full year.
So what was specifically pushed off year over year? Was there a program pushed off year over year?
We'd probably have to look at the reserve list. I don't know if you have that with you, but most of it is professional development. It's just not doing summer curriculum work that we would normally do. It's a lot of accumulation of things across the board that we thought we could get through the year by freezing them, trying to close that gap in the special ed tuition and other
Yeah, but these
areas.
I'm sorry, did you just say professional development over the summer, or? Okay, that wouldn't be in this line item, though. This is instructional supplies and materials. Would that be in that line item?
No. Mm-mm. These are supplies.
Right, so what,
Well,
so
this
was
is
there
where
a
we had the
curriculum that
10%
wasn't
as well.
purchased? Was
Yeah,
there-
this is also where, when we knew that we were going to have a challenging year,
Yeah.
we went and took 10% across the board and froze it for materials and supplies everywhere. So that's also a portion of this.
Okay, so does this increase bring you up to where you need to be for this next fiscal year?
That's always a challenging question. I do think it brings us up to where we are implementing what we need to implement, and our next generation science standards is in here.
Okay, so there was, and I don't want to bring up, and I'm going to go back and watch the quarterly meeting, right? Yeah, go ahead, Chris. But is this that $400,000?
The restoration.
Right, go ahead.
That's what he's asking.
You might be
So-
more articulate than me.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, too.
So quick history lesson just from last week, right? We found out at our quarterly review that $403,000 was taken out of the budget by the superintendent.
Was that in
And
this line item?
it was 331,000 of this line item, so predominantly,
Okay.
so 80% of this line item, right? The Board of Ed then decided they did not want to take out the 403,000, reinstated the 403,000, and took 403,000 from the fiscal year in which we're executing right now and moved it forward a year. So my question to Dr. Jones is, are you still okay with this $403,000 cut? I mean, this is the only, as far as I'm concerned, the only structural change that has been implemented in this budget. So you recommended a $403,000 reduction. You recommended a $403,000 reduction, which the Board of Ed overturned. Are you still good with that $403,000 reduction? $331,000 of which comes from this line item.
I think that restoring the supplies and the materials in the way that the Board of Education, trying to be thoughtful about what was happening in the town and with the school system, I think it was a good choice, because reducing supplies and materials is not easy. We do have teachers that purchase a lot of items on their own. Does 10 or 20% make a difference when you freeze it? Absolutely, it does. In putting the budget together, felt like, and certainly this fall, again, when we really didn't know what was happening, we came in trying to be extremely thoughtful of tightening the belt everywhere, understanding that we didn't have the $9 million to the town. There's some things that didn't happen that were very scary. I do believe that materials and supplies are critical for teachers, and I think our community was pretty vocal about not supporting my recommendation. But again, my recommendation was coming from trying to really tighten it up, but it doesn't mean that that's what I would necessarily recommend. I think if we can fund materials and supplies, because we're not increasing allocation per student, and we haven't. We've been as things go up and they get more expensive, we haven't been increasing that.
So let me ask you this question. If the Board of Ed didn't restore that money, would that budget change for the rest of our lives? Not reinstating that $403,000 next year? It's not going to put you further in the proverbial hole
If
over
you
you,
had
right?
asked the headmasters and you asked the principals, that was one question that they asked. We hope that this will get back in the budget and it will be restored. Overwhelmingly, they would tell you that because they do see that there is a need for it. Materials and supplies, obviously, you have to have what you need to teach in the classroom. And that's spread out over many, many, many different departments. So, because we have 17 schools, it may not sound like a lot, but if you only have a budget of $2,000 and you lose 400 of that, it really is a pretty big amount to that department or whoever is handling that piece of the budget.
Well, I was actually impressed the fact that, I know a large percentage of it came from this line item, but there's $20,000 in another line item, 20,000 here. So it didn't look like you just randomly skimmed off the top. You really looked for changes to make here. So
We did. All the headmasters, the principals went back in, looked at their budgets, and, tried to find those areas that weren't going to have as much of a negative impact versus me just saying, here's what we're going to do, because we do have site-based budgeting.
And I guess my last question, and it's philosophical at this point, I guess, but, we've heard a lot tonight about special ed, and I'm sure we're going to hear from Mr. Cullen about how the facilities could always use money. Could this $403,000 have been used in a better location, maybe one of those two I just mentioned, rather than reinstating it back to where it was?
Well, in all honesty, I don't think there's probably anybody who looks closer at the school budget than the school board, and that's what they're elected to do. And they literally go line by line and look at everything, and I think they did what they believed was where that money really needed to go. And I will say, when you talk about facilities, they were adamant to make sure that we're, also getting Mr. Collins' budget funded. And so when we got ready to look at, okay, we can unfreeze a little bit of this that's frozen, the first area they wanted to target was making sure that's facilities, because we don't want to get behind in that area. So I think it was a very thoughtful decision.
And I will say that, similar to the Board of Finance, the Tuesday before the Thursday that we vote, we do ask board members to identify any areas of the budget that they would like to recommend a change, either plus or minus. And the only subject that came up, the priority of the board, was on this site-based budgeting. No other suggestion that says we ought to, instead of taking that 400,000 and redoing the site-based budgeting number, let's put that someplace else. There was no other suggestion other than the site-based budgeting.
But to be fair, you've got a relatively new board, and as Dr. Jones had said, you also had an outcry from the parents. I was reading online. People thought you were taking 20% of the total budget, which was ridiculous, right? I mean, it's 20% of the allocated supply budget, right? So I'm not so sure that, I understand what you're saying, and I watched all the meetings because I was very interested to hear that Dr. Jones made this reduction and that it was reinstated. I'm not so sure that there shouldn't have been more discussion about where it should have gone, but again, not my choice.
You're going to go to Mr. Walsh?
Dr. Jones, you just said that there's nobody who spends more time on this budget than this board, and actually there is, and that's you and your staff. Spend a hell of a lot more time on this budget than the board ever does. Right? Hundreds of hours. For months, correct? I watched that Board of Education meeting when you were presenting your budget. Make the argument to this board that you made that night on why that supply number should be lower, because I thought you made a great argument. And you know what? There's nobody in this town, I don't believe, that understands education more than you, and that's why we pay you all this money and why we brought you in. Brought your talent in here. So make that argument to us on why you wanted to cut that back.
And I'll be very honest, maybe it's because it's 11:15, but I don't remember what I said. So if you help me, maybe it'll trigger a memory. But, when we start building the budget, we turn over every single aspect of the budget and look at every component.
Mm-hmm.
And materials and supplies was an area where we knew we wanted to bring a very responsible budget again. I mean, everybody knows the climate. And it was taking small amounts from 1,000 different accounts. I mean, it just all over the place. I felt like, yes, we could absorb that without having huge impacts in areas. Does that mean it doesn't have any impact? I think the board felt like it did. So I don't know if I answered your question. I tried.
Not as good as it was that night,
All
but
right.
I'll bring to another meeting, and we'll play on Fair TV your argument, because it was a great argument.
Okay.
I'm not going to make your argument for you. I'll let you make that with your own words. But we have a duty and under the law to give a free education, correct?
Right.
So none of these teachers really have to bring stuff. There's no requirement that they bring anything, because with our program, the way we run it, we have to pay for everything that's required for that program. We have a legal, statutory duty to do that, correct?
That's somewhat correct. Not really. Well, we have a
Where
free and
was-
appropriate education, so that is
Yeah.
correct if we believe that we need to provide, for instance, math workbooks for students. That's all we're going to have. And if the parents in Fairfield and the community want children sitting in their desks doing nothing but a math worksheet, certainly we could do that. That is not what we would consider quality education, and our teachers are extremely dedicated to the work that they do. They are on a limited budget. So when they are doing project-based learning with their children that they truly believe is going to make a difference for the rest of their life, they do go out and buy items, for their classroom. And when you walk in a teacher's classroom and there are sometimes it's a little chair, or it's something that's unique in the classroom. It's definitely in elementary. If you walk in any elementary and you look around, a lot of what's in there is owned by the teacher, and it's because they love what they do. Do they have to do that? No. Could our budget actually provide all of that? Perhaps if you go back to that chart and that PPE funding, and we had another 20 million in the budget, we probably could.
But that happens everywhere. I mean, if I go to Westport, let's just take that. I can go to the same teachers' classrooms. And I know people in Westport who are teachers, and they'll tell me the exact same thing you just told me. And even though their PPE might be the top in the state, those same teachers are going to say, I own all this stuff too.
I think when you go across, I've worked in districts across the country, one that was funded at the 49th. And you're right, the classrooms did look just like they do here because
did.
people love their work and love their jobs. But they also spent even more in an area like that because they don't even have the books. So, when you look at one community to another, generally the classrooms, if you have high quality staff, they're going to be amazing places, but does it make a difference? And do teachers have to buy a little bit more if they only have 1,000 in their budget and in another district they have 5,000? They do buy more and they purchase more.
If I can follow up on that, teachers aren't alone in doing that. All of our town employees do that. I was talking to the fire chief the other day, dealing with some incident over the holidays, Christmas holidays. And the firefighters went out and purchased something and gave it to the family. That was above and beyond what they needed to do. They met the minimum requirement of putting out the fire, but they went above and beyond. And I think all of our town employees probably contribute time and money to serve our citizens, and I think that's actually to be congratulated.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of professions people do that.
Yeah,
I think there's
absolutely.
people at J.P. Morgan who do that.
Yep.
That when they leave, they have to pack up boxes of their own stuff. I mean, I don't think it's just limited to.
No, it isn't.
It's just something people do.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Mr. Chairman, you tell me, but I think there's another component of this where the board took the superintendent's budget and they restored the supply line, but they cut the proposed capital purchases in technology and then gave direction, although I think Ms. Munzel said that it hadn't been spent yet, to use savings of about $1 million worth of insurance to put those spending of those dollars for $403,000 of technology in this year's budget. So I don't know whether you want to wait until we get to the technology line to talk about that, or do you want to talk about that now?
I have to say I don't understand it
Okay, so if you.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what happened, just so that I understand the mechanics.
So what I'd like to hear is what the difference between your two budgets was, between.
And Mr. Mottola, you've been very patient.
I was going to talk about that. I thought it was pretty clear what the explanation was a week ago.
I can actually watch it on TV. I don't need to go through it again.
My understanding is, through your own efforts, you saved about $1 million because of how you reworked the insurance, correct?
We jumped on the opportunity to change insurance in October.
Right, and so, and then you decided to take about $403,000 and to purchase, to restore the $400,000 material cut, correct? And when I say you, the Board of Ed did that,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
The Board of Ed, who is, although Dr. Jones knows the budget really well, we have an elected Board of Education, and that's certainly their prerogative to do that. They heard from the parents, and that's what they did. So that's correct, right? So now you have, that's what was voted on. So it's my understanding now you have $600,000, and is it your intent, if nothing happened for the rest of this year, would that be returned back to the town of Fairfield?
You're asking Mrs. Munsell a very difficult question.
I know she's nervous about it, she doesn't know what can happen, but let's assume we only have an inch and a half of snow tomorrow, and things stay the same. Is it your intent to turn that money back over to the town of Fairfield?
Here's how I would answer that, is that we look at that as though we're trying not to touch it because we would have had to solve our budget without it. So if we are able to get to the spring, it will be a board discussion. Either special education costs have gone awry and we're asking the board, are we going to access this? What do we do with this? But it will be hopefully still sitting there if everything goes well. And if something goes off the charts, it's going to be a board discussion anyway, because I or Ms. Munsell are not going to spend that without board direction.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead.
There's one piece missing, right? So the Board of Ed restored $403,000. So all of a sudden, the budget is $403,000 higher than it was before that motion. So to make the budget back to 3.1%, they said, I'll take $403,000 out of technology and fund it from this year's operating budget. So so this year we'll plop out at some point in the year $403,000 and move it forward. So it's a cost avoidance, but
How do you move it forward? I guess that's,
Well, no,
the
we're
nomenclature's bothering me.
they're pre-buying
purchasing.
it. All intent and
Similar to
purpose.
the-
For all intent
Similar
and
to the
purpose,
year
you're-
we pre-purchased
Understood.
textbooks.
Right, so they're not moving it forward, they're pre-purchasing.
Okay, but you're using 2017, 2018 budget money to buy something that's in the 2018, 2019
We're
budget.
using
Just happened
2017,
before.
18
Well, it's a bad process.
surplus money that generated because the staff bought into
Yeah,
the
I-
health
I-
insurance early. It wasn't budgeted to save that $1 million. It was something that the staff worked hard at to accomplish.
Okay.
I get it. I'm saying that there's an excess of funds in this year that you're pre-purchasing materials or technology, and that's how you fill the hole in for, so.
Correct.
Right.
Mr. Walsh?
And this is the problem with that, is that you guys are unilaterally finding a savings, which I think is a great savings. Trust me, I think it's great. And you know what? We have them on the town side sometimes, and we manage to those, but we don't go about spending it on capital for the next year. Each year's its own year. And here's the problem, though. And there's been years where you've had to come to the town because some of your expenses have been higher than what your budget is, and you've had to come hat in hand to us so that you didn't go back up to the red, because all of you would have to go up to the state if you finished in the red, correct? It's a big deal.
I don't remember that. When does that happen?
A couple of years ago,
How many
Dr.
years ago?
Title did with
No.
some of this.
Boiler one year and they went over budget. They came to us.
No,
But we're always here as trying to your backstop, and it's not, I don't believe, it's my opinion, that it's not honest budgeting
if you start looking at next year's and realize, oh, we have $1 million positive number this year, for whatever the reason, and next year, it could be $1 million bad number. So what am I supposed to say? Oh, okay, so you're looking at this to say, because we statutorily can, we're going to take this $1 million savings we found and not return it to the town. And we're just going to spend it. We're just going to go on a spending spree, buy whatever we want with it. We're going to spend it. But next year, if you have $1 million bad number, things you didn't expect, storms you didn't expect, boilers blow up that you didn't expect, an insurance number that goes the wrong way on you by the same $1 million number you didn't know about this year, you have a number of students you never knew about come in to the district on special education funding that you never anticipated. And now you're $1 million bad. And what are we supposed to say? Well, you got to operate within your operating budget. Sorry you had a bad year. Because I'm going to be probably looking at you saying, hey, you know, if you had honestly budgeted with us and bought what you were supposed to in this year and spent the capital that you had told us you were going to spend in this year, yeah, I'd be there, because it's a partnership between us. It's a partnership where I have to trust that when I give you 160 some odd $1 million, that you're going to spend that money appropriately, and if the numbers work out and there's a surplus, that you're going to return it to the town. And on the other hand, if the budget, which is a budget, doesn't work out next year, and you have unanticipated expenses, and you need money, that you feel like you feel comfortable that you can come back to us and we'll understand that without having to tell you, oh, I'm sorry. We're not going to, you know, do whatever you have to do. Increase the class sizes halfway through the year. Cut certain expenses halfway through the year. And that's the problem I'm at, because if I can't, if I think you're just going to be spending savings, then why would I fund if you go over? I just don't understand that. And it just breaches the trust, I think, that we have between our two bodies, which I think has been a pretty good trust that we've developed. This is starting to go down a road I don't like.
Mr. Flynn, may I comment?
Yeah, you can.
Thank you. In the 7 years that I've been on the board, we have always balanced our budget. 1 year, we did come to the Board of Finance when we had the special education issue, and we had found 900 out of the 1.4 million that we estimated we would be short. And we did ask the Board of Finance that if we cannot find that money, will you back us up? And you very clearly said, yes, you would. But our staff continued to look, and we never did come to the town and ask for that money. We found all 1.4 million within our budget. This year, when the issues of the state and special education existed, our board sequestered 2.3 million in anticipation of having to use that money to cover other expenses. And we did not come to the Board of Finance or to the Board of Selectmen and say, we're short 2.3 million, please give us the money. The staff, I'll say with the board's approval, but the staff did a lot of work to do that. I don't recall from my history, maybe Mr. Mottola, for the 6 years prior to my serving on the board, because he was on the board, I don't recall during his tenure that Mr. Walsh's statement that says, and we've come to the town and said, bail us out. We've come to the town and asked for support in the event that we couldn't, but no, we didn't. I think we have.
It was on the internal service fund, actually, where your internal service fund was going south and you couldn't meet the IBNR number, and you asked that we support your, and move town funds over to support your internal service number.
On the internal service fund, there has been times where the IBNR required us to have about $1.2 million, $1.5 million.
And in my recollection, is likewise, the Board of Ed has moved funds over to the town side to support their issues years ago. So
we have worked together.
they have worked together.
And on the internal service fund, my numbers that I recall, is that during Mr. Matola's tenure, we needed about 1.2, 1.5 million IBNR. And at one point, the money that was in that fund approached 5 million, because we had been putting more money into it than really was required. And then when Mr. Tetro came in, he worked on that and bolstered the town side of the medical retention fund, which then allowed us to bring ours down to an appropriate number. I think we have worked together in a trusting way to say we are one town, so let's try and figure out how to support the needs of our school students working together.
Mike, or Mr. Tetra?
Yep, thank you. I think that certainly over the years, there have been a number of instances where the pendulum swung both ways. I can remember Mr. Flynn and I going before the Board of Ed and saying, please keep your internal service fund balance where it is while we work on the town and try and bring that back into sync. We've certainly had some special ed issues that have gone out, and again, I'm going to say that Mr. Flynn, Superintendent Dr. Title at the time, and myself sat down and said, okay, here's how we can balance that out between the two and work together. The difference with that year, the Board of Ed went on to save the money, so we never had to access the town, though we did put a number of things on the town side on hold just in case. I mean, both budgets are very tight. We don't have a lot of extra costs or contingency costs on either side. I would ask that we not refer to the Board of Ed budget as lacking honesty, because I think that's a term that just creates more emotions than we need to. Perhaps some better disclosure and better discussion to help out, but I would just ask that we not put those kind of emotional terms as a judgment on, because I trust the Board of Ed folks as being honest and forthright, and I know that Dr. Jones and I had a discussion about this issue back when she was looking at it, and I pointed out that, you know, we had done this a few years ago with textbooks, and something that we had all agreed on at that point. So it was something that we had looked to from time to time so that we wouldn't raise taxpayer dollars, that it was a way of using dollars that taxpayers had already paid for with their taxes, so we wouldn't have to increase dollars in the budget next year as opposed to coming back with a higher Board of Ed budget. So I think that certainly some discussion might have been in order to help make sure everybody was on the same page and to allow for everybody's input. But I just don't think that we need to term that as dishonest.
But that textbook issue was not something that came up during the budget season. That was something that came up with a surplus that they had had.
No, actually, it came up, I think, right after we'd voted on the budget in the spring, and we realized that we had an opportunity to, and I'm sorry, I'd have to go back and check all the, for some reason, it was the same, structurally the same thing. There was a hit on the next year's budget that we're trying to bring that down, and by pre-buying the textbooks, that let us address an issue with the next year. And forgive me, I don't remember all the details.
It was a discussion with Dr. Title about a surplus he was going to end up with at the end of the year. And it was a joint discussion with this body about why he would want to do this. And that was a joint discussion as opposed to this board doing it during a budget process where they changed their budget, where they come, Dr. Jones has a budget, it comes to the body, and then they start going back to $1 million savings from the previous year and just unilaterally trying to do this.
Yeah, suggesting that perhaps some discussion would have been helpful. I think you've made your point on that side. I'm just pointing out that we've done things similar to that in the past. I think it would have been helpful to talk it all through this year, certainly, so that everybody was on the same page and we understood that.
Let's go to
Each
Mr.
person
DeWitt
uses
real
a different
quick.
word. Our board actually thoughtfully discussed it, and there were some board members who said, no, let's keep the budget the same and just add 400,000 back into the budget and ask for more than 3.1% increase. And others said, no, we ought to smooth out the budget, stay at the 3.1, and can we solve the issue a different way? And so it was a thoughtful discussion that happened between Tuesday, when the board members suggested it, and Thursday, when the budget vote took place.
Let's go to Mr. DeWitt real quick, and then I'll come back.
Yeah, I don't know if I made myself clear or not, but I watched the two nights, the night prior and the budget vote, and we spent most of the night tonight, again, talking about special ed and all these risky programs, and aside from the year or whatever, I just feel like that $403,000 could have been reallocated to something maybe more important in your budget. Not more important, it's all important, right? But it seems like there's a lot of discussion around risky items that are not being addressed, but yet you advocated for the only structural change in the budget, and the board just completely, ignored it and put it right back without, and I don't think there was real discussion around where else that should go and all these other needs. So, again, aside from Mr. Walsh's comments, that's my only comment.
Anybody else?
I'd just like to say that if this is allowed to continue, this is a dangerous precedent. This board is not supposed to, you're supposed to be presenting us a budget on what your program is to cost, and your board is not to be sitting here and managing between two different budget years and trying to smooth things out. That's not what your role is. It's not. Your job is for us to give you, the town to give you a pile of money and then to manage with it and turn over really what's left over and be good stewards for the town, to be honest with you.
So so you would have been, just so I understand what you're saying, that the $400,000 should have just been in next year's budget. That's, because you have a problem with the process, it sounds like.
I have a big problem with the process.
All right.
Yes.
So, all right, just so I understand it.
So let's bring this back in. I'm going to wrap this up. There was a number of years ago, there was a problem with the IBNR. Let's go back to history. The town side had not been funding its IBNR to the level that it should have, and the Board of Ed side had been overfunding it. So the Board of Ed side had been carrying the weight of the town side. It came to a point where the Board of Ed ran into trouble with their own IBNR through a variety of circumstances, including, as I recall at one point, they used a percentage of the IBNR for cost savings during a difficult budget year, right? At which point the pendulum swung and the town had to put more into the IBNR than the Board of Education, right? So there was that give and take within the internal service fund for that period of time. There was also, as Mr. Dwyer correctly points out, a situation that arose in the Board of Education when Dr. Tata was here, where you basically came to us and said, we've got a fiscal problem, we might not be able to find this. If we can't find this, can you put funds aside that can help us fill the gap? Right? That happened. In both these instances, the town and the Board of Education worked together, right? And I heard Mrs. Marmion mumble this over there, and I wasn't trying to overhear it. But you said that's within their purview. You're absolutely right. It's within their purview to reallocate their budget within their year, right? So they could actually spend that money within the year. We basically approve the budget, they put it in here, right? We approve it based on what they put in here, but if they want to go buy 1,000 Lamborghinis after they walk out the door, unfortunately, they can do that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's part of the
No,
humorous side of...
I'm not even saying, that. It's just an example. I'm not saying they would ever do that. I'm just saying, it's within their purview. They can do whatever they want once we write the check, right? Because that's within their purview. And I'm not saying you would do that. In this instance, you basically came up, there was some thrifty management of the budget in the past year because of all the risk, right? And then you came up with, at the end of the year, it looks like you're going to have some additional funds left over because of the work you did within your budget. And the Board of Education then directed you to spend those funds in a certain way, as opposed to spend them in a different way, or as opposed to sending them back to the town. I think from my viewpoint, I understand that it's within your purview. It would have been nice to get a heads up about it, given all the struggles that we've had overall on the town side and overall with the state budget process, right? So it would have been nice to have a discussion on that, but it wasn't required. You could do what you want to do with that. But I think that goes to the kind of the eroding of the communication side. So I guess I would have liked to have known that, hey, we're looking to do this, we look like we might have an access, and we'll probably spend it in this way. And by the way, if we do this, we should be reducing the budget request in 2018, 2019 relative to this. And oh, by the way, on the town side, we've done a similar thing, but we've done it through creativity by taking funds that we're not spending this year and paying down the debt next year. So we've actually done a similar scenario there to kind of balance that risk out, right? I think this is a communications exercise. But I will state, because just before I got on this board, one of the things, and I think it resulted in having to do McKinley over, that Board of Education did 20 years ago, was they actually took funds that were supposed to go towards maintenance, towards the schools, and John, you were around at that time, and they spent that money on staff, right, which resulted in, Kevin and Mary were certainly around at that time. Mary was in diapers, Kevin was, fully he was about, Kev, you were about 50 at that time. But you'll recall that they took those funds, right, and they didn't spend them on what was supposed to be spent on the maintenance of the schools. They spent them on other priorities within the school budget, and they ran aground with McKinley School. Is that not a fair statement?
I would have to check. It's been a while, but there was an issue many years back.
So I think we don't want to go down that slippery slope of funds not being spent in that way. That's all, right? That's all.
I think that's great. I just think we have to be careful, as Mr. Tetros said, with the language that we use, because that adds to the communication snafus, in my opinion. So I think we just have to be respectful and move on.
Well, that's fine, but I think that's what the issue we're all trying to wrestle with right now, because $400,000 is a lot of money now, given what we're trying to do with the state.
And we really do have a history of working together, all the bodies in this town, so, and I anticipate that that's going to continue on.
Well, we're not going to do a group hug.
After the meeting, we can do one, okay.
And I will say, I don't want to get to the point where I have to say, out of your $173 million, that, you know what, I'll give you 172, and I'll keep $1 million on the town side in a fund called Education Contingency. And then make you have to come and ask for it at the end of the year, but also justify that all the other expenses were the same. I don't think we should have to do that. But obviously, in this past year, that would have been a good thing, to me. Each budget year is its own to me. It's you tell us what you want, what the capital expenditures you want, and if there's money to be returned to the town, it should be returned to the town.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other comments on this budget item? All right, seeing none, let's go to operations and maintenance of buildings, which is page 43. The big driver here appears to be utility services. Want to talk to us a little bit about what's going on here? Mr. Cullen, welcome.
Thank you very much. For the record, Tom Cullen, Executive Director of Operations. So if you turn to page 42 and 43, we provided an awful lot of detail in the narratives to identify for all of the accounts which ones were increased or decreased and why, but you really want to focus on our electricity rate increase and our heating rate increase. That coupled with the increased square footage we've added to some of the schools and will continue to add, the increase of mechanical means of fresh air and air conditioning are all drivers to more electricity. And we added a couple portables at Holland Hill during their construction project.
So, Tom, what I don't understand, what comes to mind as I look at this, a 5% increase or whatever, I see all these solar panels going up all over the place, and we've invested, whether our money or others' money, in putting these solar panels, and we're going to save all this money on electrical. Where are we seeing that savings? Because we're going up by 5% here.
Yep.
What did we save on these solar panels and all that, and is that
Good
factored
question.
in here?
First of all, the town, the Board of Ed, doesn't spend any money on the solar systems at all. They're all contracted through the electric company and the state through grants.
Right.
And the savings that we make on every location that are in the utility bills, the contractors paid from those savings. So we're also not witnessing the huge amount of savings that we're going to see after 20 years when the contractor's fully paid for all of his systems. They get paid on the savings from the utility bills.
But I think those systems are only supposed to last like 20 years, right?
No, they last longer than that. And then secondly, the largest systems, like at the high schools, the solar carports for Ward High School just went live March 1st. So we have to look at our budget and project what we think we're going to save for the months left for that portion of the
So
budget.
you have no savings in here for what's at Ward?
Not
right
for
now?
Ward, and even Ludlow High School was supposed to go live in August and didn't go live till November.
So we have
lost
no
a few months
savings
there.
for Ward or Ludlow?
Not for
Solar
the
panels.
carports. For the rooftop, there's 2 systems at each high school. There's one on the rooftops that were installed a couple years ago, and then there's the carports that are out in the parking lots. So there's 2 systems.
So we are overestimating our expense here because we haven't baked in any savings for the carports.
Well, we wouldn't because we don't even have a full year of savings to look at.
I understand, but
We only
we-
have the projections from the contractor, and he's been close with his accurate
What's his projected savings?
estimates. I don't have those in front of me, but I can certainly get them to you. All the systems, what they're estimating the savings to be.
Yeah, because it seems like what we're doing, different places in this budget, at certain points, is we're doubling up. We're saying, well, we're going to spend the money and we're going to have savings, but we haven't budgeted for any of the savings.
No, we identified savings. We went through the utilities,
But
many
not for the
meetings.
carports.
The carports were a tough one to deal with because they didn't go live.
Ballpark, what they might be?
No, I don't want to say anything publicly. I have a sheet that identifies all of it that I can share with you.
You don't want to do it publicly, why?
I just don't want to say a number publicly and have it be double that or less. I'd prefer to be accurate.
Okay. All right, so there's some savings here that hasn't been factored into the budget because you haven't felt comfortable enough to factor it into the budget.
And then we have increase in square footage at some schools, as I said.
Right.
Mechanical means of fresh air and air conditioning, those systems all get factored in.
Okay. Anybody else?
Top, okay.
Go ahead. John?
So you're gonna, I know you don't want to say it publicly because you want to be accurate. We're going to get that information? that
I'm
you
asking
think?
for it, yes.
Yeah, I've got
Just wanna make
spreadsheet
sure.
I can send you.
Thank you.
Can you supply what the savings are from this solar panels per school?
Yeah, that's what the
Okay.
chart shows.
Okay.
Every system.
Okay. And also, the carports that you're talking about, I thought we voted as a body last year turning down some type of solar panels at the high schools. What are
That was
the
the
ones?
charge-in thing.
Those
were
are
the
chargers,
chargers.
okay.
Yeah.
So there's no chargers up there?
No, there is. There's a vehicle.
Tell me some of the 600,000 and the other savings went to the
No,
charges.
there's a vehicle charging station at Riverfields when their system went in. That one you didn't discuss.
That we knew about because it's part of the construction project.
And the
Get
ones,
the lead
the ones at
standard.
the high schools aren't installed, but they're still considering them with the town. Scott Thompson is looking at that to see if it still can work, because there was difficulty about, you remember the discussion we had, we didn't want the public.
What are they trying to figure out?
Well, we had to add some things to the solar system, like lighting got added in underneath the systems to brighten up the parking lots, because we felt it was blocking a lot of the telephone poles and the other exterior lighting, but
I get that, but what does that have to do with charging?
they still are considering it. They're considering it because if they can get it to work and have a timer on it that's only used for teachers and staff at those 2 schools and can be shut down so that the public can't come onto the sites and use them, I think they're still looking at that.
Would that cost the taxpayer any money?
Less savings.
It would mean less savings.
Less
right?
savings.
I mean, that was something that we specifically said,
Right.
no, we're not underwriting the transportation costs for employees to get to work.
That's correct.
But people are still looking at doing
It's
it?
not a question for me. All I know is the contractor was still interested in trying to make it work if he could find a timer and come back to the boards and say, we can do this the way you want.
Who's paying for this?
The solar carport systems or the electric charging for the cars? The solar carport system at the 2 high schools was done by a company called Skyview Ventures, with a contract with electric company.
Okay, was this approved by the town or the Board of Ed?
For the,
Yes.
the carports, the solar panels on the parking lots,
Yeah.
is a power purchase agreement, so there's no dollars the town is shelling out. We just, they get installed and we get a cheaper electric rate.
Who approved it? The Board of Ed?
Board of Selectmen.
Okay,
Yeah.
did you approve that there would be
Board
car
of Ed
chargers
did.
there?
The, I don't remember.
If I could comment,
Do you
I'd have to go
remember?
back and look.
Yeah, I don't think we approved the car chargers at Ludlow or at Ward. There was questions of whether they would be able to have like a couple random plug-ins, like like the plugs against the wall when they were installing the lights, and that I don't think we ever had any solution on. But the car charging ports weren't part of the solar package we approved.
So you approved it with knowing what the savings were going to be and all that stuff, but there may add now car charging devices on there?
Given,
Oh,
Not saying they're going to add it.
given the hour, I suspect we might want to get the facts before we spend a lot more time talking about what might be.
all right, so you'll get us those facts, and since the Board of Selectmen is the one who approved this, you'll get us what is allowed and not allowed and all that other stuff, pursuant to your bonding, pursuant to what you approved.
I think there's
all that
a
stuff.
power purchase agreement that should spell all that out.
Yes, there is.
Okay. Can we get a presentation on that at another meeting,
Moving on. Yes.
during our budget meeting?
Capital.
Oh, wait.
Oh, go ahead, Mary.
I have a question. It's actually if you could provide us a little more information. I was on the understanding that when we approved additional space at like Riverfield or Ludlow High School or even Holland Hill, then when we had discussions with the building committees, that they didn't think adding space was going to increase our utilities because of all the energy efficient things we were doing to the buildings. So I just want to get an understanding of how much that is, what that cost
An
is.
excellent point.
Because we have a couple of building projects coming up, and that's one of the issues being debated. If you could get us some kind of an analysis on how that square footage is increasing our costs.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent point on that. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll move on to capital. And capital's going down by $1 million. So let's, Tom, are you going to speak to that as well? And that's page 45. Are you speaking to that?
I don't think so.
Or who is speaking to that?
On that 503, 403 of that is what we just discussed in the pre-purchase.
Yeah. So it's really only going down by $500,000 because you're pre-purchasing technology this year. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for staying. Go ahead. So 963, talk to us about this.
Well, as you know, we discussed the 403,000 with the intent of the pre-purchase. The balance of that, we actually talked about when we were talking about the non-recurring bond for the switch equipment. We had, in trying to keep our capital request for technology somewhat level over the years, had anticipated 500,000 towards the switch project. And then when we went through the bonding, we just didn't ask for it in the operating budget, so we reduced our number for this year. It'll go back up in subsequent years. The content of what we're doing is we're continuing to expand the use of technology in the 7th grades and in social studies and science at the high schools next year. We're increasing the wireless capacity at our 3 middle schools because the current system is almost at end of life and is not adequate for the number of devices that kids are walking around with today. And we're refreshing some of the hardware based on our 5-year plan.
Thank you. Do we have questions on capital on this one? Okay. Seeing none, thank you, Nancy. We will go to dues and fees. This is very small. Please tell me there's no questions on this. All right. That is the Board of Ed budget. Are we-
Budget Book 142.
Well, that's separate. Yeah, that's separate. Do we have any other questions right now on this budget? I have an observation and a comment and a follow-up, but do we have any other questions on the Board of Education budget? We went through each of the sections, each of the categories of expense. Anything specific?
There's some numbers in the, for the projection for enrollment section.
Please tell us what page.
And I'm trying to figure it out. I just looked this when I was going through it. I don't have it. Yeah, I think it's near the end. Yeah.
Talking about in our budget book, the 120 area?
Starts on 122.
122. Where you go by, I'm trying to look for the, I guess it'd be around 127. Where you go by school, where it has per grade. And the number that just kind of jumped out at me was that the Mill Hill thing, and I know we're going to get into this more a little bit later on, but, so we're actually projecting, or you're projecting, or the numbers you're getting from your enrollment specialists are projecting that you will be going down in population in Mill Hill from 347 to 341, correct? And the proposal is to put a 504 there, to jump that number up by that many seats, right?
That is what is in the Ed Spec the board's approved.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was reading that correctly.
All right.
And that's a one-year projection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where are the numbers going? Up or down, and for the Mill Hill?
Over the 10-year life, it's going up.
By how much?
380, 385, somewhere in that category. I don't have the exact one in my memory.
Okay. But significantly less than 504, correct?
Any other, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the Board of Ed? Here's a follow-up that we've got a number of follow-ups. The most confusing, and this is, again, not a qualitative comment, so don't take it as a criticism. The most confusing aspect of this discussion this evening has been special education. What would help me is the documents we asked for as to the new initiatives. And also, do we have a breakout on how much we spend of special ed, on special ed now versus how much we'll spend next year? I'd like to, I know I missed it. And is it all inclusive? Because the special ed costs are kind of broken out throughout this document. Oh, there's transportation, there's tuition, there's personnel costs. I mean, where is it?
Maybe page 119, where you have,
Yeah, but-
everything spread out by program.
And I was trying, I saw this earlier, not tonight, but when I looked at your book earlier. And thank you for the BITE program again. But what does this include and what doesn't this include?
Wouldn't it be this one, 113?
So it is page 119.
Isn't that inclusive? 12 million?
See, the one, I guess, here's something to consider, and this is not, we talk a lot, or you guys talk a lot, about per pupil expenditure, right? Our per pupil expenditure is down. Our per pupil expenditure, I've always thought that that was, okay, whatever, that's a stat that you guys want to quote. I look more at the results and say, great, everybody's being more efficient, kids are doing well, you know, we've got a great school system, you do a wonderful job, and you do it efficiently. Special ed continues to rise as a percentage, and one of the reasons I think the per pupil expenditure is a bad marker is because it really looks like your per pupil expenditure for students that don't need special services continues to go down. And our expenditures for people that need special services, I'm not saying this is wrong, is going up. So there's less resources going to, is it right to say that there's less resources going to the general student that doesn't get special services and more resources going to the kids that need special services? And this is not again, this is not a qualitative, this is just, it concerns me, are we, that per pupil thing is skewed, right?
I would say that's a measure that's used across the country to look at how you are funded as a school system. And it does work if you look at it per pupil, because you're comparing one district to another and how those dollars are spread out across the district. Every student has a different cost. And you can't assign, just because a student may have, let's say they're a $3,000 student because they're in a particular course that needs certain lab equipment. And maybe another student is not in that course. They're in a different course where they don't need as many materials. It's that aspect of it is different for every single child in the district, and it's about making sure we meet everybody's needs. Per pupil does work when you're looking at how you're funding an entire system, and we have to look at it systemically.
Okay. I don't know, I heard what you said, I don't know, I'm just trying to process it. And again, I'm not making any assessment on it, I'm just looking at it because everything we heard today was that our special ed costs continue to go up, and sadly, your ECS grant continues to go down, right? And I just worry about where we're getting squeezed. I just feel badly.
Actually, there are two ECS grants.
Yeah.
The educational cost sharing grant that comes into the general fund
Right.
has gone down. The excess cost sharing grant that goes directly to the Board of Ed, actually in the current year was up over $1 million over
So
what
what's
was
our
budgeted.
net, though? Like, between the down and the up, are we up or down? Between both?
ECS and
Well, we're down between both, but.
We're down compared to both, right?
Right, but-
That's what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
just want to be clear on what we're talking about
Yeah,
being
no, I get
down
it, I
versus
get
what
it.
we're talking
Thank
about
you.
being up.
I get it. But net,
Right,
and
but-
we're down.
But what goes to the
Right,
town.
right, exactly, and where we're up, it's just because we're spending more. It's not because on a percentage basis it's higher, right? Right? Yeah. It's just something that area kept coming up today, and it was not clear to me. It just didn't, I didn't understand it, that's all.
But to answer directly the comment you made.
Speak
about-
up, please.
And perhaps into the mic.
And I'm hoping this is a correct statement. Regarding if the students are getting squeezed, there's a $2 million increase in special ed. There's a $5 million increase in the school budget. So there's $3 million increase going to the non-special ed kids.
That's only what's being called here as special ed, and there's all sorts of, I don't know whether that includes transportation.
I think, but in the program, I think it's supposed to
Right,
be
and
every.
then and then Jim's absolutely right. The increase in payroll is not considered in that number either. And the vast increase in payroll is related to the new programs.
Well, I guess since it's labeled program costs, I thought it was all
Right,
inclusive.
exactly, and that's what I'm saying. I don't think it really is. God bless you, somebody just sneezed.
Salaries are included in the program numbers, not benefits.
Okay, so benefits aren't included, so that's a big chunk too.
What about transportation?
But I think even, the point I want to make is, because people are at home watching on TV and will
Transportation.
watch replays, is that the per-student cost of the non-special ed kids is going up as well, just maybe not as much.
Yeah, but I don't know that it's going up at the same rate. I'm just
Right,
and
yes,
I'm not
that's why I
trying to
said maybe
strike
not as
us
much.
versus them.
Right.
That's not my intent
Yeah,
here,
no,
is
no.
to set something up like that. I'm trying to understand where our resources are going and how we're spending the money. That's it.
No, I fully understand what you're saying, and I think you're being
But-
And
very.
what future
Yeah.
budgets might look like
Right.
because of that. Exactly right.
Right.
But if we're looking at ratios like per pupil expenditure, when we're comparing to other districts, that also, every district that I've heard of in the state, their special ed costs are going up.
I don't
The
know
question-
that. And I don't know whether they're going up by
Right.
a rate basis or by a volume basis? I don't know what's
Yeah,
driving it.
Right,
there's two
and
conversations
my
going.
point is just that that's part of the mix when we're looking at comparing to other people. And it is a significant cost, and probably one of the cost increase for every school district that I've been involved in conversations about it. Certainly something that comes up at CCM conferences when First Selectmen get together and talk about that. So,
Right, and if that's the case and everybody's dealing with it, it's a very difficult challenge.
oh, and in the sense that any one ratio describing a $300 million or a $170 million business is not going to work entirely.
And Mr. Timniak, you
Yeah,
had something?
I'm sorry to go back to the book, but I actually do want to answer this. On page 127 and 128, you list two possible additions for Jennings. I'm assuming those are classroom additions. For Jennings, North Stratfield, and Riverfield.
I'm not seeing
When you say additions, what do you mean by additions?
It says in the book, two possible additions. So,
Oh,
on page,
okay, so, Dr. Jones can explain what we mean by two possible additions based on the cut point for whether we have to add a section or not.
okay, so we're talking about adding a section. I don't need to know the cut point. The thing is, when I go to page 142 and I look at the teachers, I would expect to see two possible additions for North Stratfield. And then it doesn't equal that for Jennings, but Riverfield has a jump of 7 additional staff. So I don't see consistency between North Stratfield, Jennings, and Riverfield, which all are labeled two possible additions. So I'm wondering why there's such a jump in staff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's where they're putting the CLC, that's where
Yep,
the
so
point
that's
is.
changes in programming. What you're seeing for the enrollment projections is just regular education classrooms and the numbers of students in those classroom by classroom breakouts, but the overall staff projections is going to include new programming. The CLCS that you saw as one of the new programs that we're adding for special education, that will be placed at Riverfield. So that will require one new special education teacher, a new social worker, and several non-certified staff as well. So that explains the difference there.
So, all right, so that explains that, but why wouldn't I see North Stratfield going up by 2 teachers?
So when you see, you see North Stratfield going up. Let me get on the right page here. So there's 2 possible additions there. We have that marked as an area where we might see new classroom sections, but what we really made sure we did this year, which was different than years past, was that in August, if a principal at one of the elementary schools suspected that they were going to meet that threshold and need another classroom, we made them make sure that every single student in that grade was actually enrolled and planning on coming that year, to make sure that no one moved out of the district, no one had made other plans to go somewhere else to a private school, to ensure that we really were at that threshold. Because in the past, when we had made that mark that we might need an additional classroom, we would hire without necessarily doing that legwork to make sure that we did actually need to hire new staff.
Thank you, all set.
All set? Anybody else have anything they want to add? Go ahead, Mrs. Esmond.
So, Dr. Jones, I'm looking at that page that goes back, I think, to 2011 on our budget increases, and I think the average is barely 3%. So, when we seem to be in a few areas on a really razor-thin edge, and we know there's additional pressures on us for special ed, what areas of concern do you have? What really concerns you at this point? In terms of shortfall, inadequate funding?
Page 21. Well, I will say that the state at the moment has not gone after excess cost reimbursement. Ours is about the same, maybe a little bit more this year. I don't know what's going to happen as they're looking at the current year's deficit going into next year, whether the state will eventually even have to look at that. And so I think as a Board of Ed, we would have to be cautious about whether the ECS is one thing, but the excess cost, if the state were to start going after that, that would be something for us to keep our eye on in terms of risk, which is, I think, what you're asking about.
Yes, and I'm just speaking for myself, but, you know, I'm looking at the rate of our budget increases, and we're discussing PPE, and I'm just concerned about the level of funding in general.
Yeah, I mean, we are a people-driven business, and the most important thing that we do is take care of our staff. And I think it's really making sure that, you know, going forward, how are we retaining and keeping our teachers especially, trying to keep really very high morale so that they love coming to work, which means they have to have adequate staff. So if you go back to like what we were talking about with the CLC, and, you know, last year we had some teachers literally in the middle of the year leave, and hard to fill positions. And part of that was they felt they could no longer really do the job the way that they needed to be doing their jobs. And we don't want to be pressuring our staff to the point that we're not adding the programs that we need. When you start having 9 or 10 children, and I'll just give one example because I'm out in the classroom, so I see. I talk to our teachers, and, you know, I was in a room on Monday and talking to the CLC teachers, one of the teachers, and they keep notebooks that are this thick, and I was looking at everything they're logging, and, you know, I was talking to this para who was logging, and, you know, they're with a child who's having 15 and 20 seizures a day, really significantly, you know, medical fragile. And not only are you doing your job, but it's also for an individual, it's exhausting when you're so concerned about one child who's having some significant medical issues. So I think taking care of staff, that's my biggest concern is, I think, going forward, making sure we're paying teachers competitively so we don't allow ourselves to get too far behind. I think you're starting to hear that from FEA right now. They feel like the gap with some of the people we want to compare ourselves to is getting a little bit wider. And I think people will stay in Fairfield to a certain point. But I think it's huge. I think taking care of staff and adequate staff and support staff, it's very, very important.
Thank you, and I agree, because my other question is, how do we, you know, stop some of this churn?
Yeah.
And I think it all gets back to the same thing. And I feel like, you know, we're really on a razor edge with some of this funding.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Seeing none, I want to thank you for all the hard work and effort once again, and thank you for putting up with us this evening, and for staying late, and for your staff staying late as well.
They do the 142 numbers for that.
Yeah, we will. You guys have a good
I'm saying
evening.
they do it.
Oh, they do it. Okay. Well, sit there for a second. Let's go to page 142 in our regular budget book, and this is Health and Welfare Services. I didn't think they did this usually, but that's okay. This is down by about 10%, or about $16,000 year over year, from 146
That's him.
to 132, or rather, from 143 to 132, so down about 14,000. Does anybody have any questions on this budget? It's page 142, 143 in our budget book. Anybody have any questions in this budget? We're down? That's a good thing? All right, if I don't, going once, going twice, anybody have anything? Seeing none, and seeing no members of the public, I would thank you very much for everything once again this evening. Thank you. And can we have a motion to adjourn?
One final comment. Linda passed out a schedule with page numbers on it, so you might remember to keep that for...
Good job, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. I'm going to take Mrs. Esma for adjournment. I'm going to take a second by Mr. Brown. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Good night, everybody. Thank you.